Hi there. Welcome to another episode of Behind the Unicorn. I'm Emily Davis, and I am here talking about how nonprofits really work and how nonprofits really should work. This episode, I am going to be talking about one of my love-hate relationships, which is strategic planning for nonprofits. I want to talk about what strategic planning is, what it isn't, and talk about the process of strategic planning. And so, this is a really important part of nonprofit life and nonprofit work. Strategic planning is one of those things that, for many organizations, is a necessary evil. And arguably, most nonprofits are doing it wrong. When I started in consulting, one of the things I heard is one of the more popular consulting services was strategic planning. So a lot of on fundraising and strategic planning. And frankly, I didn't want to do either because they both just sounded terrible. Uh, as I became a governance consultant, I saw a lot of really bad strategic plans. And, before we had the internet, a lot of strategic plans would be written and they just go in a file and they never get used. And that's the same thing that happens today is people sort of check it off the list and then it's never to be seen or used again. And I didn't want to do strategic planning. And strategic planning is actually a governance function. And so having good strategic plans are really important, but they're also pretty rare. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I want a different approach. I want an approach that I think is going to work better. And so I developed for my company a different way to approach strategic planning. Full disclosure, I'm biased. It's something I designed. So I'm certainly going to be an advocate for it. But what I can tell you is that every strategic plan that I've seen developed in a half day or a day long or a 2-day long retreat doesn't work. It just is one of those things that it ends up in a filing cabinet, whether it's physical or virtual. And I didn't feel good about being a consultant that would deliver that kind of outcome. So the process I use is very much a process. And I preach this everywhere I go that strategic planning for nonprofits is a process, not just a document. You can check it off the list with a document, but you've wasted time and resources by not developing a strategic plan that really focuses on the process as much as the resulting document. So, in this podcast episode, I'm going to talk about strategic planning and, from my experience, what really works in creating a good strategic plan. And it's very much going to focus on that belief that a strategic plan is a process, not just a document. I do trainings on this, I talk about it all the time. One of the things about strategic planning, and I've already mentioned this and I'll mention it again, is that strategic planning is a function of governance. What does that mean when I say that? The board of directors, who are legally and financially responsible for the organization, have three buckets of responsibilities: setting organizational direction, providing oversight, and ensuring resources. And the strategic plan really fits in all of those buckets, but ultimately it is setting the organizational direction. So the board is responsible for making sure there is an effective plan in place and that it is being tended to, it is being implemented, and they provide oversight to that plan to make sure it continues to move along. And they also need to make sure that the resources are available for that plan to be implemented and measured effectively. So the board, along with the executive director or CEO, is a part of that governance function. And so they are really ultimately responsible for creating and overseeing the plan and creating accountability with that plan. When I work with organizations, there's a few things that I ask about from the beginning, or I at least want to know about from the beginning. What's your timeline? What's your budget? And how invested is your board? If folks say to me, well, we want to get this done in the next month, it's a hard pass for me. I can't write you a successful strategic plan in a month. It won't work for me. If they say, well, we have $5,000, also, I can't do that. The work that I do relies on time and expertise. So let me break it down a little bit. And let's just start with the overall picture of strategic planning that I use. And again, this is World According to Emily. You ask a different consultant, they're going to have a different approach. So how strategic planning works with me is that I start out with the proposal and contracting phase. And in that phase, we get really clear, me and the prospective client, about the terms of our work together, the scope of work, how much time it's going to take, what I will actually be doing for them. So I really want to get all of that very clear on paper, and I'll talk about that more. But the first step is the proposal and contracting. The second is what I call the discovery phase. And this is usually about minimum of 3 months, 3 to 4 months of me gathering data. This is what I think sets a good strategic plan apart, in that it is stakeholder informed. Now, how you gather that data from stakeholders can look a lot of different ways. My background and expertise is in qualitative data collection, research, and analysis. So I use a combination of input calls, surveys, document review, environmental scan, life cycle analysis. And I'll talk more about that as well. But again, I'm giving you the high level. The next step is the retreat. And if we've done all of our work up to this point in the discovery phase, which is the biggest chunk of time and work, then by the time we get to the retreat, we can do it in a day. We can do the retreat stuff in a day. Now, you are not writing a strategic plan in a retreat. That is bonkers to me, that people think that you could get a group of humans in a room and write your 3 to 5 year strategy document. Like, imagining, whether it's 10 people or 40 people in a room wordsmithing a document sounds like a migraine and a half waiting to happen. So we don't do that. In the retreat, we talk about high level issues. And where that all comes from is it's been informed by that discovery phase. There's a report that we use. I talk about board governance essentials in addition to having a conversation about that report, because the board is responsible for overseeing that plan and making sure it gets implemented. We also have facilitated strategic planning discussions that are based on that data that I've collected. So I use that report and the data in that report to have informed, targeted discussions. Because I'm certified in different facilitation methods, once I have all that data, I can basically say, well, I think this facilitation method would work best based on the information I have. I can pull from my toolkit, as opposed to being prescriptive and saying, I'm going to use the same facilitation strategy for every strategic planning retreat. I like to be a little bit more flexible and sort of adapt to what's needed. So once the retreat is completed, then, and I don't do 2-day retreats. Maybe we have 2 days of retreats, and that's usually because of travel schedules or some other scheduling piece. But once the retreat is done, then I write up the retreat notes. Then I start to write the strategic plan. And when I'm documenting the plan, my strategic plans are very robust. I would say that is an understatement. they're long, they're deep, and I'm just talking about the narrative, okay? Because when I write a strategic plan and I write the narrative, I explain the why. I give tools and resources for implementation. It's really thorough because I personally don't I don't want to leave anything on the table. It's almost like a playbook. You could think of it that way. And then what happens in addition to that are the strategic priorities, goals, objectives, action items, and any implementation tools I can offer to help the organization off in the right direction. Some organizations will even go so far as saying, we'd like you to stay on for 3 months to do implementation support. So advising, coaching, just recommendations to get started. And so what we're talking about here is a proposal contracting phase, discovery phase, retreat phase. Then we go into the actual plan phase. And then fifth is implementation. Whether I'm a part of that as a consultant or not, it still needs to be implemented. And one of the things I'll say is that by the time my clients get to the implementation phase and they have a plan that I've delivered to them, they're much more invested. They've spent the time and the money to actually invest in this plan. And so they're much more bought in to using that plan. And my plans also include strategies for implementation. So not just tools, but how to use those tools. So all of these pieces are really important, and each one builds upon the other. The hardest thing in my strategic planning approach and processes is I'm asking organizations to trust the process. Since each step builds upon the one before it, I have to ask them to trust me before I can show them surveys or survey results or input calls or input call results. It takes time. And that's a hard thing to ask people to do, which is why my proposals, I write out as much as I can in terms of the detail of what I'm going to be doing. I want to demystify it. Again, I want to pull back that curtain behind what's going on. And there's some things that we don't know until we know. So I have to ask people to trust me. The other challenge is many nonprofit board members will come from the for-profit sector, which is different when it comes to strategic planning in terms of best practices. What do I mean by that? In nonprofit strategic planning, the board, if there is a board, will direct the CEO to write and implement the plan. In nonprofits, it's different because boards are part of that. And I would also say, along with that, is that stakeholders of all kinds have input into the plan, but they are not all at the retreat. That's a tough one for people, which I'll talk about more. It's really a function of governance. So having board and the executive director or CEO as the representative and liaison to the staff is really what's most appropriate for that higher level decision making. And again, I'll talk about that more when I talk about retreat stuff. The other thing, let's go back to the beginning and talk about a little bit more about the proposal and contracting phase and just sort of expectations around that. So to start with, many organizations will do a request for proposals. Not a bad idea. There's some consultants who hate RFPs. I don't mind them personally. As long as they're thorough. Here's a couple things about requests for proposals and strategic planning. 1, give a lot more time than you think you'll need. Contracting, just once you've even figured out the scope of work that you've agreed upon, contracting, one of my last clients, it took a month just to go through the contracting process. Just be prepared. Give yourself way more time than you need. The other thing is, humans are unpredictable. Life happens. Schedules change. People get sick. They go on vacation. If you think it's going to take 3 months, give yourself 6. know that consultants don't just have one client at a time. And so make sure that the timeline is ample enough for consultants as well. Again, I've said this in other podcasts and I'll keep saying it, is that we're not machines. So we need time. For me, I can do things pretty quickly, but I have to wait on data, right? And that data includes surveys, input calls, documents, all of those things. I have to get that information. I have to analyze that information. And then I have to, summarize that information back to folks. That doesn't happen quickly. And if it does happen quickly, there's more likelihood of errors and mistakes. So you want to give folks plenty of time. Time is always an issue. If you are going, oh gosh, our funder said we need to have a strategic plan by June and it's April or May, it's not great. You need to have your calendar set up so you can reverse engineer a timeline of the actual strategic planning work being 6 to 9 months. If that's not enough time, somebody like me is probably not going to be the right fit. Like, you can have a strategic plan, it probably just won't be as robust. But make sure you adjust your expectations based on that, okay? A couple other things I would say about the proposal process. Please, A, write in what your budget is. B, please be flexible. And share a range if you want to. If you share a range of your budget and strategic planning, consultants are always going to go, I would argue, most, if not all, are probably going to go on the higher end so they can negotiate down if they need to. But also, you're not hiring for how fast they can do it. How well they can do it is really important. And you want to make sure you have a consultant with both, or all three, I would argue, governance expertise, because this is a function of governance expertise, nonprofit strategic planning expertise. And listen, there's a lot of reading out there on strategic planning. So it's all out there. It's just if people do their homework. The third thing is expertise in facilitation, whatever facilitation model. A lot of times I use a combination in my strategic planning work and other work. I'm certified in technology of participation and essentials facilitation. So those are the two that I like the most, but I have other ones too. Nonprofit strategy revolution is another thing that I've used. I've used all kinds of stuff, but you want to make sure your consultant has that expertise. And also, just going back to the money, this is something you really want to invest in. If you are going to sort of shortchange it, do it on a really tight budget, adjust your expectations. Know that you're probably not doing a strategic plan as much as you're doing an action plan. That's okay, but be realistic about that. So again, have a reasonable budget. If you are not sure, even if somebody came to me and said, we have a budget of $10,000 to do a strategic plan. Again, that's not enough for me to be able to do my work. I've spent 20 years building these skills and expertise. And while I'm efficient, I also know how much time goes into it and how much expertise I have built over those 20 years for my strategic planning to have a higher value. But if I can't do a strategic plan for you for $10,000, just as an example, or a shorter timeline, that gives me an idea of people I might be able to refer to. So not every strategic plan or strategic planning consultant is the same. In fact, I would argue they're all different. And then one other thing I would say as a do and a don't ask for a sample strategic plan. Stop doing that. First of all, here's why. First of all, I am not going to give you somebody else's confidential plan. That is up to them to share. That is not appropriate for me to share. And it's my intellectual property because I outlined that in my contract. I'm not about to give out somebody's information, even if I redacted their name, which takes a ton of time, and I'm not doing that either. I just am not comfortable with that. Doesn't feel ethical to me. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, no two plans are alike. If I give you organizations A's plan, it doesn't mean that's what your plan is going to look like. The data is different, so the plan is going to look different. And lastly, in the world of consulting, my stuff gets ripped off all the time. What's to say that you don't take that plan, that sample plan I've shared with you, and make it your own? Right? There's nothing that says you won't do that or can't do that. And so here's the thing. It's a risk I'm not willing to take. It's not fair to ask me to share my intellectual property and the confidential information of another client. Now, whenever I'm going through the proposal process, I always explain this to folks if they ask for a sample plan. And then I think finally, the last piece of advice I would give on the proposal process is, so I've talked about the money, the time, be flexible. So when I get clients who say to me, this is exactly the process that we want you to use. No. There's nothing that says, and I'm sorry if this offends some people, there's nothing that says that your nonprofit is an expert in strategic planning, qualitative data collection, professional facilitation, and board governance. Get out of here. Just because someone used a process with you that you liked in the past, for example, or you even have somebody, let's say on your board, who's a consultant who does strategic planning, doesn't mean that that process is going to work for you now. And that as the consultant, you're going to tell me what to do. It has to be collaborative. In my proposals and contracts, I actually talk about qualities of a successful consultant-client partnership. And it is to work together. If you are hiring me, you are hiring me for my process. And it's one that I've designed. If I don't work for you, that's okay. I'm not taking it personally. Find something that works for you. But prescribing a process is going to limit you in that you're not going to even know the other possibilities that are out there. So I would say when you're going through the proposal process for strategic planning, look at just that. Find out what the consultant's process is, right? So you want to find out what are, how ready is your board to do this? Because if you have a board who's like, you're sort of pulling teeth, getting them to participate, don't bother. It's going to be a waste of your time. They're not interested. And it's like, well, if you're just going to check a box, it's a waste of time and money and resources that, let's be honest, most of us don't have that luxury to waste. So make sure that your board is invested. Make sure that you have the time. Make sure you have the money. Make sure that you are in a place that you can negotiate the terms. You understand the qualities of working with a consultant collaboratively and successfully. That is not to be underestimated. One of the questions I often ask clients too, even is, how do you like to be challenged? Because I am going to challenge you. My job is to pull out the best from you, right? And you need to be ready for it not to just be the status quo, or be clear in your expectations that you do just want to check box it, that you do just want to get the thing done so you can move on to the next thing. Be clear about those expectations. Make sure that you understand this is a function of governance. And then I think you're ready to really go through the proposal process and the contracting process before you even start the strategic planning process. those are my thoughts on getting things started. And remember, this is a process, not just a document. If you want it to be good, if you want it to be strong, if you want more people invested in both the plan and implementing the plan. Strategic planning is your 3 to 5 year strategy, although usually they're more like 3 years now because everything changes so quickly. But why wouldn't you want to invest and be ready to do some really good work with that? So the next thing I am going to talk about is once the contracting, proposal process, scope of work, all of that is complete, and you're ready to hit the ground running, what comes next?